All right, let's dive right into this. I want you to picture this. You're standing in front of a machine, and your hand is hovering right over the activation switch. Inside this machine is a crazy, twisted duct filled with highly conductive, incredibly reactive liquid metal, and it's all surrounded by a magnetic field generated by supercooled, high-temperature superconducting magnets. Now, if you flip that switch and your math is even slightly off, the machine doesn't just quietly fail. It shatters, it incinerates, or it outright explodes. So today, in this explainer, we're walking through the exact pre-flight protocol for the Alpha Loop MHD T320 engine. Because before a single drop of liquid metal ever enters this system, we absolutely have to prove the physics visually. And to do that, we have an agenda that acts as a mandatory mission protocol. We've got 4 visual validation gates we have to clear before any fabrication begins. We'll be hitting the spatial CAD fly-through, the fluid dynamics of the duct, cryogenic thermal tracking, and finally, the mock loading sequence for the liquid metal. Let's get into it. Starting with gate number 1, the T32 spatial CAD fly-through. We are dealing with some truly intense physical constraints here, mostly because our duct isn't just a straight pipe, it's a continuous trefoil knot. To actually solve this geometry problem and push fluid through a twisted knot using magnetic force, your magnetic field and your electrical current have to be perfectly aligned with the fluid's path at literally every single millimeter. So we use something called the Frenet-Serre frame. Think of it like a mathematical GPS. It gives us a tangent vector for the fluid flow, a normal vector to point our magnetic field, and a binormal vector for our electrodes. This whole framework acts as our ultimate guide to perfectly align the winding path of our modular Rebco saddle coils, making sure they conform to the duct without just crashing into each other. Because, just look at the space we're actually working with here. 390 by 390 by 90 millimeters. That is an incredibly tight bounding box on the lab bench. To put that into perspective, we have to pack a twisting stainless steel duct, 72 electrode pairs, and water-cooled copper, and eventually high-temperature superconducting coils, into a space roughly the size of a large, thick pizza box. Physical interference in there isn't just a minor annoyance, it's a catastrophic risk that would completely ruin the magnetic field geometry. So, the main takeaway here is that a theoretical model just won't cut it. A rigorous visual screen share review of the CAD blueprint is literally the only way to guarantee these nodular coils won't physically collide. We have to sit down and visually trace that winding path on screen to confirm the continuous normal field alignment is mathematically and physically flawless before we even think about cutting any metal. Okay, moving right along to our second gate, fluid dynamics and MHD ripple. Now we're shifting our focus from the solid geometry of the pipes to the high-speed behavior of the liquid metal rushing inside them. We know our T32 topology is designed to provide this beautiful continuous magnetic shear to push the fluid smoothly, but I want you to consider this. What actually happens when the magnetic field ripples? Like, what happens if our discrete modular coils create a magnetic field that slightly deviates from that perfect normal direction we just talked about? Well, the results are pretty disastrous. If that field ripples, we get parasitic fluid drag, which just kills the bulk velocity of our liquid metal. We induce these turbulent eddy currents, which basically act as unwanted heat generators, meaning we're just boiling our fluid instead of actually moving it. Ultimately, it totally compromises our force efficiency, resulting in a complete loss of topological thrust. We absolutely have to visually review external video literature and simulations of these ripples to validate our force efficiency calculations. I absolutely love this vivid analogy straight from the engineering logs. Trying to pump liquid metal through a twisted loop is like trying to push a wet noodle up a spiral staircase. It just hits the nail on the head, right? It perfectly captures exactly why maintaining a continuous orthogonal magnetic field without any ripples is an absolute necessity. If the field falters even a bit, the fluid just collapses into a turbulent mess. All right, gate number 3, cryogenic hotspot thermal tracking. Here, we're contrasting the high-speed, chaotic movement of our liquid metal with the terrifyingly slow realities of supercooled magnets. When we scale this engine up using high-temperature superconducting, or HTS, REBCO tape, we run into a really unique thermal danger. In standard low-temperature superconductors, if the magnet warms up and loses its superconductivity, which is an event called a quench, that warm zone propagates super fast. It trips your safety sensors immediately, and you just dump the power. Easy. But in conduction-cooled HTS REBCO tape operating at 20 Kelvin, the normal zone propagation velocity is extremely slow. How slow are we talking? 0.05 to 0.1 meters per second. That is a crawl. Actually, scratch that. It's dangerously slow. And what's truly alarming here is that because the quench spreads so incredibly slowly, a localized hotspot can form and just skyrocket in temperature completely undetected by standard voltage sensors that are reading the whole coil. Because of this massive risk, our third visual gate is absolutely non-negotiable. We must review thermal camera footage of conduction-cooled HTS quenches. Visualizing exactly how quickly that localized hotspot heats up allows us to accurately calibrate our dump resistor time constants. If we just blind guess this parameter, that hotspot will literally incinerate the REB cotape from the inside out before the safety system even realizes there's a problem. Which brings us to our fourth, and honestly most intense validation gate, the Mach-NAC loading sequence. We are now introducing live, highly reactive chemistry into the system. Our working fluid for the alpha loop is eutectic NAC, which is a sodium-potassium alloy. It's highly conductive and it's liquid at room temperature, which is fantastic for our engine. But it reacts violently, like explosively violently with moisture and oxygen. So the team has to execute a recorded dry run video of this exact loading sequence. A hard vacuum purge down to 10 to the -3 torr, a super strict helium leak check, a flush with ultra-high purity argon up to 1.2 atmospheres, and then finally the Mach fluid loading. We review that entire video to critique the physical movements and workspace ergonomics before anyone brings actual live alkali metals into the room. So the crucial point here is that we literally plan for failure. The secondary containment requirements are extreme, and for good reason. The catch tray has to hold 200% of the NAC volume. There can be absolutely zero water cooling lines routed inside the catch tray perimeter, because if a water line and the NAC duct rupture at the exact same time, the exothermic reaction would shatter the entire bench. We also require 2 Class D fire extinguishers and a bucket of dry sand right within arm's reach, simply because standard fire extinguishers will just make a NAC fire so much worse. And that brings us to this defining philosophy straight from the lab's safety protocols. At ANN and Nexus Labs, we do not rely on being careful, we rely on engineered containment. It really drives home the high-stakes reality of this whole build. Nature doesn't care about your good intentions, and she sure doesn't grade on a curve. If your physics or your plumbing is flawed, she just breaks your equipment. So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this final thought. When you're dealing with liquid metal, complex topological knots, and cryogenic superconductors, just assuming your math is right simply isn't enough. Have we actually visually validated every single parameter, from the CAD fly-through to the fluid drag simulations to those thermal hotspots, all the way down to the ergonomics of the loading sequence? Or is nature about to hand us a catastrophic failure the absolute second we flip that switch? It's a thrilling, terrifying edge of engineering to be on, and these visual briefings are quite literally the only thing keeping us on the safe side of the line. Thanks for joining me on this one. We'll see you next time.